Friends and travelers, however you've arrived, I bid you welcome. Here at Let's Be Frank, we're about lives, and above all, living well. I don't expect a podcast hosted by Benjamin Franklin could be about anything else. In my lifetime, I pursued the practice of moral improvement like a science, recording my successes and, yes, oftentimes reveling in my failings. It's my hope, with our weekly almanac, to give to a curious world delicious morsels of history in quick, easy-to-digest installments. Perfect for a sit in your favorite chair or a morning walk to work. At the end of each installment, I like to wrap it all up in a neat little lesson that you can apply to your own life, inspired by the events, stories, and personalities shared in each episode. So sit back, relax, and together, let's make history. Greetings and salutations, dear listener. Welcome to the season premiere of Season 3 of Let's Be Frank, an auditory almanac for the curious mind, with me, your faithful friend and host, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, printer. My beloved Junto, how long has it been? Well, too long. I had initially desired to come back much sooner than this. However, we had several arrangements to make to bring to you this new format for our podcast. We're very happy to add video to our proceedings so that there's new ways to engage. Now, for those just joining our show, what are we about here at Let's Be Frank? Let's Be Frank is a history podcast centered on bringing primary sources to life, particularly sources associated with my life, the life of Dr. Benjamin Franklin. Season 1 followed the events leading to the Declaration of Independence, culminating in a reading of the Declaration of Independence. Season 2 followed the events leading up to the 250th anniversary of the Boston Tea Party. Season 3 is going to move in a similar format. Season 3, I'm loosely calling Snatching Lightning. I wonder, my beloved Junto, if you can guess what event we're leading up to. You guessed it, my famous kite experiment. And in the meantime, we're going to release episodes centered around history that I find interesting. My hope is to give you bite-sized installments of history, encouraging you to think about events that perhaps you didn't know about, or at least to think about events that you knew about in new and unique ways. So settle in, my beloved friends and fellow lovers of history, as we begin. For purposes of good order, this podcast is composed of several sources associated with Ben Franklin's life, knit together to collect them all into one narrative on a cohesive theme. Today's episode is about great deeds. It's about monumental tenacity, and it's about two women responsible for them. Now, my beloved Junto, I'm certain we are all familiar with a particular individual famous for their midnight ride. I'm speaking, of course, of Paul Revere, who we talked about in Season 2. Paul Revere famously was responsible and made legend for a midnight ride screaming the redcoats were coming, warning the people of Lexington and Concord about the imminent seizure of the gunpowder leading up to the Battle of Lexington and Concord. This event was eventually aggrandized in the 19th century, and Paul Revere was taken from man to instead myth, added to the canon of American mythic historical figures. There is another figure that 2 years later would receive equal renown, though perhaps not equal fame. I'm speaking, of course, of the young Sybill Luddington. Now, born in 1761 in Connecticut, Sybill was the eldest of 12 children of Colonel Henry Luddington. Her tale became legendary many years after the event took place. It's this delay that has led some to question the authenticity of her story. The question I pose before you as we begin to visit this history is Sybill Luddington's story fact or fiction? Now, the story goes that on the night of April 26th, 1777, at the age of just 16, Sybill rode through the night to warn the American militia of the approaching British forces. The ride was reportedly 40 miles long, more than twice the distance of Paul Revere's ride. I must remind you, my dear friends, in my lifetime, the most someone might cover in a day is 30 miles. The fact that young Miss Luddington did a distance of 40 in a night is no small feat. She rode through the dark, drenched in rain, knocking on the doors and shouting, warning the British are coming. By dawn, she had roused more than 400 troops to prepare for battle. Now, where are the primary sources regarding Miss Luddington's account? Where are the letters? Where are the witnesses? Alas, there are none. The first known written account of her heroism came in 1827, 50 years after the event, when Martha Lamb mentioned it in her History of the City of New York. Then, in 1880, her story was popularized by American historian Benson Lossing, who had interviewed Sybill's descendants. Now, there are elements to the story which certainly lend to its credibility. Sybill's father was indeed a militia officer, and there was a surprise British attack on Danbury, Connecticut on the date mentioned. But the details of Sybill's ride, such as the length and number of militia she roused, cannot be independently confirmed. Now, what's extraordinary is that the legend of Sybill Luddington has endured. Here's something I truly love about history and the study of history, my dear friends. At this very moment, somewhere in America, or perhaps even the world, in some dust filled attic or deep in the catacombs and archives of a library or historical society, there is a document, a single document, which in its ink can confirm or perhaps nullify this historical account. The past is never far from us, my friends. New history is being made and waits for us just around the corner. Now, if I'm going to cover a figure whose history is questionable, I must, in all things, have balance and talk about a figure we know, in fact, a great deal about, that I personally know a great deal about because I am related to them. Now, this figure was requested some months ago by a member of our Junto for me to visit, and so I'm very, very excited to do so for you now. As you know, March is Women's History Month, so I deliberately put forward the examination of these two women, particularly because the examination of women is something which I love a great deal. Now, we're going to get to our next figure that we're going to talk about, which is my sister-in-law, Anne Smith Franklin. Now, this name may not sound familiar to you, outside of the name Franklin ringing a bell. But it's not her relation to me that makes her worth remembering, but rather the high achievements of her lifetime. Now, Anne was born in 1696 in Massachusetts. She moved to Rhode Island after marrying my brother, James Franklin, the same James to whom I was apprenticed in Boston. Now, James was a printer and had been for a long time, publishing the New England Courant. Now, it was at this time that my sister-in-law, Anne, began dipping her toes in the water of printing, assisting not only my brother James, but writing sermons for preachers, poems for the public, and gaining a reputation all her own. When my brother James passed away in 1735, my sister-in-law, Anne, took over the business. Now, this made her the first woman printer in America, and in many respects, one of the earliest female journalists in America. She took over the Rhode Island Gazette and ran it in many respects superior to my brother James, breaking norms of the time and setting precedents which would benefit other women along the road. The most astounding thing, in an age that sought to stifle the female voice, my sister Anne's voice was eventually raised to that of printer of the colony of Rhode Island, charged with printing all important documents, money, and other things essential for the function of government. Now, over the course of our lives, we exchanged letters, we spoke of the business of printing, and just as my brother James had been integral to my career as a printer, so too was Anne on my career as a printer as well. Anne's story is a story of grit. It's a story of innovation. It's an American story. And most importantly, it is a female story. Now, what lesson can we derive from this introduction to our third season? As I said before, history is being made every day and is constituted of great events as well as small ones. But as we move through the history that we make now in 2024, it's essential to remember that no great act and no great history was ever made by doing nothing. I'm looking forward to this third season and this new format. If any member of our junto has means whereby I might see all your faces while you see mine, kindly let me know. But for now, I should be pleased simply to look at myself while I talk. For now, that's all for today's installment. Would that we had more hours in the day, but as always, we have nothing but time between us. A happy reminder for those who are just joining us to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at B Franklin Live, Facebook at Let's Be Frank, and Auditory Almanac for the Curious Mind. Join our Patreon and support the stories we try to tell here every day. And if you like the show, kindly leave a review to make it easier for new members to find us. Resource materials and images from this week's episode can be found in the journal section of B Franklin Live. And now, dear listener, our time together must come to an end. Fare thee well. And always remember, when you are good to others, you are best to yourselves. Until we meet again, I remain your humble and obedient servant, Dr. Benjamin Franklin, Printer. Stay curious, my friends.